The morning began with an unusual stillness that settled over the building long before the first meeting. Assistants moved quickly through the hallway, carrying folders that looked heavier than usual, while department heads rehearsed their opinions with a confidence that revealed more anxiety than certainty. Inside the boardroom, the vice president adjusted his notes and prepared his performance for the budget review. He had delivered this routine many times and believed his authority had become untouchable. When he mocked her proxy document in front of the entire panel, laughter surfaced from two directors who understood neither the clause nor the consequence. He dismissed the signature as symbolic, something that belonged to an investor too distant to matter. He did not know she had arrived in the building before dawn. She signed indiscreetly, reviewed the agenda, and waited in a private office until the moment carried the most impact. Her appearance was not dramatic. She entered the boardroom with the calm presence of someone who understood the value of timing. Conversations fell away as she took her seat, not at the edge where guests usually waited, but directly at the table where decisions lived. The vice president looked up, confused by her presence, then unsettled by the silence that followed. She opened her folder without speaking. The acquisition agreement lay inside, marked with the clause that granted her unrestricted attendance at any company meeting. She slid the document toward the board with a single composed gesture. The vice president's confidence drained slowly as he realized he had exposed his arrogance to the one person whose vote outweighed his entire faction. He tried to recover with a casual remark, yet the room no longer belonged to him. Authority had shifted before he finished his sentence. She observed him quietly, not with triumph, but with recognition. Power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply arrives and waits for the room to understand. Long before anyone knew her name, she learned how influence could grow quietly in the background while others competed for visibility. She rarely visited the company, not because she lacked interest, but because her understanding of power came from reading documents rather than attending ceremonies. She studied shareholder reports with the patience of someone who valued clarity over applause. As the years passed, she acquired small positions through overlooked agreements that executives considered harmless. Each purchase appeared insignificant, yet each one created a thread that connected her more deeply to the structure they believed they controlled. While managers focused on presentations and performances, she focused on rights embedded in old contracts that no one bothered to analyze. She traced forgotten clauses that granted decision privileges to early investors, privileges that had never been revoked because no one imagined they would be used. Her strategy did not require visits to the building. It required comprehension of what others ignored. When departments reorganized, she reviewed the paperwork to identify gaps that revealed shifts in real authority. She did not compete with louder personalities who sought recognition through speeches. She built a foundation no one could see because they never examined the documents she examined daily. Her influence deepened when she discovered an old restructuring file that had been approved hastily during a period of financial stress. The file contained rights that allowed minority shareholders to consolidate decision power if certain conditions aligned. Those conditions quietly aligned after the vice president pushed through a new expansion plan without proper verification. His oversight became her opening. She increased her holdings by acquiring forgotten shares from retiring employees who assumed they held no strategic value. By the time the company celebrated its anniversary, she possessed access that exceeded what her silent presence suggested. Her power did not come from entering the building. It came from understanding how the building had been designed. Influence grows differently for those who read before they speak. The vice president built his reputation on certainty rather than accuracy. He moved through the company as if every hallway confirmed his importance and every document existed only to support his plans. When he saw her name on the proxy lists, he dismissed it instantly. He assumed any investor who remained silent lacked conviction. He believed presence measured influence, and that absence revealed weakness. His understanding of power came from titles and applause, not from structure. This misunderstanding shaped every decision he made. During strategy sessions, he projected confidence by dominating conversations and offering conclusions before anyone else finished speaking. Board members rarely challenged him because they preferred feeling guided rather than informed. He translated their compliance into confirmation of his abilities. When financial results began showing inconsistencies, he blamed market conditions instead of examining his own decisions. His authority survived because people feared disruption more than they valued accountability. This environment allowed him to continue underestimating forces he never took the time to understand. His behavior toward the Proxy list grew more careless with each passing quarter. He laughed when administrative staff mentioned her vote. He treated her absence as evidence that she lacked commitment. He never considered that silence might conceal intention. He never wondered why her holdings remained consistent while others fluctuated. Each oversight strengthened her advantage without her lifting a hand. One afternoon, he reviewed shareholder updates and dismissed her section without reading the footnotes. Those footnotes contained the expansion of her voting power through a clause he had approved himself. He signed the amendment hurriedly during a period when he sought rapid expansion to impress external partners. He did not realize that the same document quietly restructured influence in ways that weakened his position. By the time he understood, she was not merely a name on a page. Her foothold in the company had already surpassed his. His underestimation became her foundation. She began examining his financial reports with the same attention a historian gives to archived manuscripts. Nothing appeared suspicious at first glance. The figures looked balanced and the summaries seemed coherent. Yet a subtle pattern caught her eye. Certain numbers repeated in similar proportions across unrelated departments. She knew that genuine data rarely mirrored itself with such precision. The irregularity revealed a habit rather than an accident. She continued her review with measured patience, noting every detail that seemed too convenient. As she compared quarterly documents, she discovered inconsistencies that pointed toward hurried adjustments. Expenses were shifted from one account to another without proper justification. Revenue projections were altered without matching annotations. His reports created a narrative of stability, but the numbers lacked the depth that authentic performance requires. Each modification hinted at an attempt to preserve an image rather than demonstrate accuracy. She traced the movements the same way one traces the path of a single thread woven through a complex fabric. Eventually, the thread revealed its origin. She turned her attention to external transactions. Payments to consulting partners appeared inflated, yet the services described lacked clarity. Travel budgets expanded rapidly despite no documented expansion of responsibilities. His reputation within the company relied on grand presentations filled with confidence, but the financial record suggested a dependency on manufactured success. She recognized the tactic from other executives who prioritized perception over grounding. The gap between his projected authority and his documented performance widened with every discovery. Her analysis uncovered a critical detail. A previous merger review had required full transparency, yet he bypassed the requirement by submitting summaries instead of the mandated breakdowns. The Oversight Committee accepted his explanation because he delivered results that seemed reliable. She understood that reliability presented without verification often masks instability. The evidence did not expose criminal intent. It exposed incompetence hidden beneath polished language. By the time she finished her review, she possessed a clearer view of his position than he did himself. His foundation was not strong. It was merely decorated. She waited until the company entered its busiest quarter, a moment when distractions weakened attention and procedures carried greater weight. The vice president believed he controlled the pace of every review, yet he never noticed how the calendar aligned perfectly with her quiet request for an internal audit. She submitted the form with calm precision, selecting categories that required the most detailed verification. The request did not accuse. It simply triggered a mechanism designed to reveal truth without emotion. Once activated, the process followed its own structure, untouched by personality or influence. The auditing team arrived with composed professionalism. They did not speak about intentions. They followed the sequence of examination with a discipline that came from years of investigating complex systems. They reviewed departments he claimed to have strengthened. They examined accounts he believed he had concealed cleverly. They compared his verbal reports to the written evidence he hoped no one would scrutinize. She watched their work from a distance, understanding that silence held more impact than debate. Auditors rely on documentation, and documentation never flatters those who rearrange figures to create illusions. Over the following days, the atmosphere in the building shifted. Conversations lowered. Employees exchanged glances that suggested they sensed something moving underneath the surface. The vice president attempted to maintain his usual confidence, but his gestures betrayed a growing unease. He stayed late in his office, searching for explanations he had not prepared. His attempts to appear in control only emphasized how little control he actually possessed once the audit gained momentum. When the auditors presented their preliminary findings, the shift became unmistakable. The inconsistencies she had quietly observed now formed a clear sequence of errors. The numbers outlined decisions he could not justify. He tried to offer context, yet the process left no space for improvisation. Facts held the authority he once believed belonged to him. Her voice remained absent throughout the review, not out of restraint, but because it was unnecessary. By the time the auditors closed their folder, his composure had already fractured. The system had spoken. The board gathered in the executive conference room with a tension that hovered just beneath the surface. Reports from the audit had circulated quietly among the directors, each one reading the findings with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant recognition. The vice president entered with a stack of prepared remarks, hoping a confident explanation might soften the impact. He adjusted his expression to project firmness, yet the energy of the room refused to support him. No one greeted him with the usual enthusiasm. The hierarchy he relied on seemed to dissolve as soon as the meeting began. She arrived with a folder containing documents that outlined her expanded voting power. She did not rush. She placed the folder on the table and waited for the moment when clarity would matter more than commentary. The chairperson opened the session and invited the vice president to speak. He launched into a detailed defense of his decisions, shifting blame toward external circumstances and unexpected market movements. His words moved quickly, as if speed could compensate for the fragility of his arguments. Directors listened politely, but without engagement. Their attention drifted toward the materials she had brought, sensing that his explanations no longer held relevance. When she opened her folder, the atmosphere changed. She presented the clauses that governed shareholder influence, referencing amendments he had approved without understanding their implications. She stated facts with a steady tone, offering no opinions. The board examined the documents with growing clarity. Authority was not shifting because she demanded it. Authority was shifting because the structure had already granted it to her. The vote proceeded with a calm efficiency that left him unprepared. He raised objections rooted in sentiment rather than logic, but the decisions no longer depended on sentiment. When the results were read, her shares eclipsed his entire network of support. The room accepted the outcome with silent acknowledgement. Power had rewritten itself without conflict. It followed the path she built patiently. The morning after the vote, the company moved with a quiet rhythm that suggested nothing unusual. Employees entered the building with their usual routines, unaware that leadership had shifted during a meeting that ended without raised voices. She arrived early and walked through the lobby with the composed presence of someone who understood the gravity of the moment. Staff greeted her respectfully, not yet realizing how deeply the organization had changed. Her new authority did not require announcement. It carried itself naturally through the structure she had spent years studying. In the executive wing, the vice president packed his belongings with the stiff movements of a man trying to regain dignity through order. He assumed the board would delay implementation or offer a transitional compromise. He believed his history with the company entitled him to a more graceful exit. Yet the documents provided no room for delay. The takeover followed procedures he had approved without reading carefully. Each step unfolded with precision. Security escorted him only to ensure confidentiality, not to punish. The process honored protocol even as it removed him from the position he thought invulnerable. Meanwhile, she met with department leaders to outline the immediate adjustments required for the transition. Her tone remained steady, neither celebratory nor severe. She focused on stabilizing operations and reinforcing clarity where uncertainty had grown under his leadership. Directors who once gravitated toward him now recognized the depth of her preparation. She demonstrated understanding of every segment of the company, referencing files no one expected her to know. Her approach replaced panic with calm realism. Employees felt the shift without fully naming it. By midday, the executive announcement was released internally. The response across the building was a mix of surprise and quiet acceptance. She assumed the presidency, without spectacle, offering reassurance through presence rather than speeches. The vice president exited through the private corridor used for transitions of this nature. No ceremony marked his departure. Ownership had changed hands with the finality of a door closing, gently yet decisively. Experience becomes a form of capital when it is recognized not only as knowledge, but as perspective. People who reach their 50s carry a depth that younger colleagues often misinterpret as caution. In reality, it is a refined understanding of timing. She had learned that success rarely comes from the loudest voice, but from the one that waits for the moment when the structure is most ready to shift. Observing the vice president had taught her that ambition without awareness eventually collapses under its own weight. She let him underestimate her because confidence built on assumption exposes itself naturally. Her journey became a reminder that influence can grow in silence. She never competed for attention or tried to match his dramatic gestures. Instead, she studied contracts, monitored financial trails, and strengthened her position through small, consistent decisions. People often forget that organizations are shaped by documents more than speeches. She aligned herself with a written framework while he aligned himself with performance. With time, the framework proved stronger. For professionals navigating later stages of their careers, her rise illustrated a valuable truth. Age does not diminish potential. It sharpens purpose. The ability to wait without losing direction becomes a strategic advantage. She relied on this patience while the vice president hurried to protect an image that could not hold. Her restraint allowed reality to reveal itself with clarity. She understood that confrontation wastes energy when the system already carries the answer. When she assumed leadership, she did not celebrate loudly. She walked into her new office with a sense of grounded responsibility rather than victory. She knew that maturity brings a different kind of ambition, one shaped by stability rather than competition. She intended to lead with the same quiet precision that had carried her through the takeover. Her story stands as a reminder that silence, when paired with preparation, becomes a force stronger than noise.